Show map. This is the first episode in our 15-part series on the India-China border dispute, focusing on the untold history of Aksai Chin, a vast, desolate, and strategically vital high-altitude plateau located in the western Himalayas. Timeline. The region's history is rooted in the 19th century, when the Dogra Kingdom of Jammu and Kashmir sought to solidify its northern frontiers against Tibetan and Qing influence, leading to the pivotal 1842 Treaty of Chushul. Archival photo. During the mid-19th century, British colonial surveyors began mapping the vast, uninhabited territories of the Himalayas, training officers to define boundaries in regions where no central authority had ever established permanent administrative or tax-collecting presence. Map. W. H. Johnson, a surveyor for the British Raj, proposed the controversial Johnson Line in 1865, which explicitly placed the Aksai Chin Plateau within the borders of the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir, despite a lack of physical occupation. 3D terrain. Before the modern geopolitical crisis, Aksai Chin was a frontier of uncertainty, characterized by extreme aridity and elevations ranging from 4,000 to 7,000 meters, serving only as a seasonal transit route for nomadic traders and their livestock. Map. Geographically, Aksai Chin connects the Xinjiang region to the north with the Tibetan Plateau to the south, making it a natural, albeit rugged, land bridge that became increasingly vital as regional powers modernized their military logistical capabilities. Document highlight. By 1899, Sir Claude MacDonald proposed the Macartney-MacDonald Line to the Qing government, which effectively excluded Aksai Chin from British India, though the Chinese government never provided a formal response to this diplomatic offer of boundary demarcation. Map. The lack of formal acceptance by the Qing dynasty created a lingering ambiguity, as the British continued to oscillate between different cartographic interpretations, leaving the status of the plateau legally undefined for the next several decades of colonial rule. Timeline. Following the 1951 entry of the People's Liberation Army into Tibet, China began to aggressively consolidate control over its western frontier regions, viewing the Aksai Chin Plateau as a necessary corridor for linking Xinjiang and Tibet via road. Infographic. The stakes for both nations were high. For India, the region was an integral part of Ladakh, while for China, the plateau was essential for maintaining territorial integrity and military communications between its two most sensitive western provinces. Document highlight. In 1954, India and China signed the Panchsheel Agreement, a diplomatic framework meant to govern peaceful coexistence, yet the document failed to address the underlying territorial discrepancies that would soon lead to a total breakdown in bilateral trust. Map. The most critical development occurred when China completed the G219 highway, a massive 1,200-kilometer engineering feat that traversed the Aksai Chin Plateau, connecting Xinjiang and Tibet without ever notifying the Indian government of its construction plans. Archival photo. Indian patrols only discovered the existence of the strategic G219 highway after its completion in 1957, a discovery that shocked the Indian Ministry of External Affairs and shattered the diplomatic optimism fostered by the earlier Panchsheel Agreement. 3D terrain. This clandestine construction project signaled a new era of military escalation, as the plateau transformed from a quiet, nomadic grazing ground into a highly militarized zone, setting the stage for the inevitable conflict of 1962. Map. The theater of operations spans 600 kilometers along the western sector of the line of actual control, where the lack of a clearly defined border continues to cause frequent face-offs between Indian and Chinese military patrols even today. Timeline. From the 1842 Treaty of Chushul to the 1993 Border Peace and Tranquility Agreements, the timeline of Aksai Chin is defined by a series of failed diplomatic efforts to reconcile conflicting historical claims and cartographic legacies. Map. As tensions reached a breaking point, the absence of a shared understanding regarding the border alignment meant that both nations were effectively operating on different maps, leading to the catastrophic military confrontation that would define the 1962 war. In our next episode, we will examine the detailed military maneuvers of 1962 and the specific tactical failures that allowed Chinese forces to secure control over the plateau, fundamentally altering the security architecture of the entire Himalayan region. Document highlight. The 1960 officials' report remains the most comprehensive exchange of historical evidence between the two governments, where both sides presented extensive, often contradictory, colonial and imperial records to justify their respective sovereignty claims over the plateau. Map. Historical nomadic grazing patterns, while observed in the region, were never documented with the administrative rigor required to satisfy modern international legal standards for sovereignty, leaving the plateau in a state of perpetual administrative limbo for centuries. 3D terrain. The extreme climate of the Aksai Chin Plateau has prevented the development of significant permanent archaeological settlements, meaning that historical claims to the land are based almost exclusively on administrative records rather than physical occupation or cultural heritage. Map. The Macartney-MacDonald Line, though never formally accepted by the Qing, remains a critical point of historical analysis for researchers who argue that it represented a missed opportunity for a negotiated settlement before the rise of modern nationalism. Infographic. India's official position maintains that Aksai Chin is an integral part of the Union Territory of Ladakh, citing historical usage and the Johnson Line as the primary legal foundations for its territorial claims in the western sector. Infographic. Conversely, China asserts that Aksai Chin has been part of the Xinjiang region since the Qing dynasty, arguing that the border was never formally delimited and that the LAC reflects a traditional, customary line of control. Map. The 1993 Agreement on the Maintenance of Peace and Tranquility along the Line of Actual Control was a landmark, yet it failed to address the fundamental lack of a mutually agreed-upon map, leading to continued patrol overlaps. 3D terrain. The rugged, glaciated, and arid terrain of the plateau complicates any attempt at ground-level border demarcation, as the physical environment itself is constantly shifting, making traditional surveying methods nearly impossible to implement effectively for both sides. Map. Infrastructure development, including dual-use roads and high-altitude airfields, has significantly increased the risk of tactical escalation, as both nations seek to improve their logistical reach into the disputed zones of the western Himalayan frontier. Timeline. The evolution of the border dispute from a colonial cartographic exercise to a modern military standoff highlights the dangers of leaving territorial boundaries undefined, especially when those boundaries are located in strategically critical high-altitude corridors. Document highlight. Despite the extensive diplomatic exchanges in the 1960s, the fundamental disagreement over the validity of the Johnson Line versus the Macartney-MacDonald Line remains the core legal obstacle to any future, long-term resolution of the border dispute. Map. The strategic importance of Aksai Chin is magnified by its proximity to the Karakoram Pass, a historic trade route that has served as a gateway between Central Asia and the Indian subcontinent for centuries of human history. Archival photo. During the early 20th century, the British Raja's focus on the Great Game against Russia often overshadowed the need for precise boundary demarcation, leading to the casual approach that ultimately created the modern crisis in the region. Map. The 1842 Treaty of Chushul is frequently cited by historians as the earliest evidence of a recognized boundary, yet it was never a modern treaty of demarcation, leaving significant room for interpretation by both Indian and Chinese diplomats. Infographic. The total length of the line of actual control in the western sector is approximately 600 kilometers, a stretch of land that is almost entirely devoid of permanent human settlement but vital for military surveillance and logistics. Map. Aksai Chin's elevation, which ranges from 4,000 to 7,000 meters, creates a harsh environment where oxygen levels are low and temperatures are consistently sub-zero, making long-term military deployment an extreme logistical challenge for any nation. Document highlight. The 1954 Panchsheel Agreement was intended to foster friendship, but its failure to address the border meant that the two nations were essentially ignoring the ticking time bomb of their conflicting territorial claims in the western sector. Map. The G219 highway, which now serves as a major arterial road for Chinese military transport, was built in secrecy, a fact that remains a primary source of Indian grievances regarding transparency and trust in bilateral relations today. Infographic. Military spending in the border regions has increased significantly over the last decade, as both India and China invest in advanced surveillance technology and rapid response infrastructure to secure their respective claims along the LAC. Map. The lack of a defined border means that patrol overlaps are not just possible but frequent, as both sides interpret the traditional customary line in ways that maximize their own territorial reach across the Aksai Chin Plateau. 3D terrain. The plateau's isolation has historically protected it from the pressures of modern state building, but its strategic location now makes it a focal point for the geopolitical competition between the two largest nations in Asia. Document highlight. The 1996 Agreement on Confidence-Building Measures was another attempt to reduce the risk of accidental conflict, yet it, like its predecessors, struggled to overcome the deep-seated lack of trust between the two military commands. Map. Historical maps from the British era often show inconsistent boundaries, reflecting the shifting priorities of colonial administrators who were more concerned with regional stability than with precise, long-term demarcation of the high-altitude Himalayan frontier. Infographic. The area of Aksai Chin, estimated at 37,244 square kilometers, is roughly equivalent to the size of several small European nations, highlighting the massive scale of the territory that remains under dispute between the two nuclear-armed neighbors. 3D terrain. The plateau is characterized by high-altitude salt lakes and arid plains, a landscape that is both beautiful and unforgiving, providing little support for human life but offering immense strategic value for military logistics and surveillance. Map. The border dispute is not just about land, but about the control of water sources and high-altitude passes that provide access to the broader Tibetan Plateau, which is critical for China's internal security and regional influence. Document highlight. The 1960 officials report remains a vital resource for historians, as it contains the most detailed articulation of the legal arguments that both countries have used to justify their positions over the last 6 decades. Infographic. Modern satellite imagery has revolutionized the study of the border, allowing researchers to track infrastructure development in real time and providing evidence of the rapid pace of militarization along the LAC in the western sector. Map. The western sector of the border is the most militarized, with both India and China maintaining significant troop deployments, a reflection of the high strategic stakes and the lack of a mutually agreed-upon boundary line. 3D terrain. The plateau's geography, while challenging, has been bridged by modern engineering, allowing for the rapid movement of personnel and equipment, which has fundamentally changed the nature of military operations in the high-altitude Himalayan environment. Document highlight. The 1993 and 1996 agreements were intended to prevent the use of force, yet they have been tested repeatedly by the realities of the ground, where the lack of a defined LAC leads to frequent, often tense, confrontations. Map. The historical focus on the Johnson Line has made it a symbol of Indian sovereignty, while China's rejection of this line is a core part of its narrative regarding the illegitimacy of colonial-era boundary demarcations in the region. Infographic. The total length of the G219 highway, over 1,200 kilometers, is a testament to the scale of Chinese infrastructure investment in the western frontier, a project that has fundamentally altered the strategic balance in the Himalayan region. 3D terrain. The plateau's high elevation provides a natural vantage point for surveillance, making it a critical asset for both nations in their efforts to monitor military movements and maintain regional security along the western frontier. Document highlight. The 1960 officials report remains the gold standard for understanding the historical arguments, yet it also serves as a reminder of the deep, unresolved differences that have prevented a peaceful resolution for over 60 years. Map. The border dispute is a complex, multi-layered issue that involves historical, cartographic, and strategic factors, all of which are deeply intertwined and continue to shape the geopolitical landscape of the Indo-Pacific region in the 21st century. Infographic. As we conclude this first episode, it is clear that the history of Aksai Chin is not just a study of the past, but an essential foundation for understanding the ongoing tensions that define the modern India-China relationship. Timeline. By uncovering these historical realities, we gain a clearer perspective on the challenges of territorial sovereignty and the enduring impact of colonial-era boundary lines on the peace and stability of the modern, interconnected Asian continent.